Emily Rios, a high-ranking diplomat from Earth, found herself standing in the heart of the Zatharian Empire, a vast and ruthless regime that stretched across dozens of star systems. She was there to negotiate an alliance, a mission of survival, not only for Earth, but for humanity's fragile place in the galaxy. The United Federation had collapsed, and now humanity's future rested on the delicate negotiations she had to carry out with the Zatharians. It was a task that weighed heavily on her, but Emily was no stranger to high-stakes diplomacy. Trained to navigate the most complicated political minefields, she carried with her not just hope for survival, but the ambition to secure humanity's place in the galaxy. The Zatharian Empire was a powerful force. Its capital, Zathara, was a sprawling metropolis of towering spires, an architectural marvel that seemed to pierce the sky. The city was a dark mix of awe and fear, the air thick with a tense energy. The Empire's ruling class consisted of a council of warlords, each more ruthless than the last. The Zatharians, a six-limbed reptilian species, governed their empire with strict militaristic order. Every Zatharian was expected to know their place in the rigid hierarchy, and their expansionist tendencies made them a threat to any race they encountered. Earth's population was small, its resources even smaller, and their status as a rapidly advancing species made them both an asset to the Zatharians and a looming danger. Emily had arrived in the Empire with a sense of purpose. The Federation's disintegration left Earth on the edge of collapse, and she knew this alliance could change everything. If she could convince the Zatharians to work with Earth, it would not only secure humanity's future, but also give them the strength to hold their ground against the rising tides of galactic instability. Yet, despite the importance of her mission, the Zatharians saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience, an outsider in their eyes, and they had made it clear from the moment she arrived that they didn't view humanity with much respect. She was treated with a cold formality, often patronized by the warlords, who regarded her as an insignificant curiosity. But Emily wasn't one to be easily dismissed. Her mind was sharp, her strategies well-rehearsed, and she knew how to play the game of diplomacy even when the odds seemed stacked against her. She quickly adapted, learning the rules of the Zatharian court, observing the subtle body language of the warlords, and carefully choosing her words. Yet no matter how much she tried to ingratiate herself, the Zatharians maintained their distant, calculating attitude. One day, during a tense high-level negotiation with the Zatharian leadership, Emily stumbled upon something she had not expected, a hidden message buried in the encrypted data of a diplomatic document she had been reviewing. At first, she thought it was a mistake, some random string of code or a corrupted file, but the more she analyzed it, the clearer it became that it was a deliberate transmission. The message was clear and unsettling. The Zatharians were preparing for war, a massive, galaxy-shattering campaign aimed at humanity's colonies. The shock of this discovery hit Emily like a physical blow. The Empire, which she had believed was merely negotiating for more power and resources, was secretly planning to exterminate humanity before it could become a serious threat. The coded message indicated that the warlords had already mapped out their war strategy, and their fleet was preparing to set off in secret, hidden in the deepest corners of the Empire. The full-scale invasion was just weeks away. Emily was torn. She had come to Zathara to secure peace, to foster understanding, but now her mission had taken a darker turn. She had uncovered a secret that could destroy humanity, and she was alone with this knowledge. The warlords, known for their iron grip on power, would not tolerate this kind of betrayal. They were ruthless, and they would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their plans. Emily understood that her discovery had already made her a target. If they learned what she knew, her life would be forfeit. But she was not ready to give up. She had no intention of letting humanity be wiped out without a fight. Her mission had shifted now. It was not just about negotiating an alliance, but about stopping a war before it began. Emily couldn't trust the Zatharians. She had to uncover the truth behind their plans, and more importantly, find a way to stop the impending war. The deeper she delved into the Empire's secrets, the more she realized just how dangerous her position was becoming. As her investigation grew, the warlords began to take an unexpected interest in her activities. It started with subtle glances, quiet whispers, and little signs that Emily was being watched. At first, she told herself it was all in her head, that she was overthinking things. But soon, the tension became palpable. The Zetharians had noticed her digging, and now they were beginning to suspect that she had uncovered their plans. They were waiting for her to slip up, to reveal her hand. And Emily knew that when they did, her life would be over. In the shadows of Zethara, Emily found herself navigating a complex web of political intrigue. The warlords were calculating, dangerous, and always watching. She was the only human in a foreign world, caught between the threat of war and the only chance humanity had for survival. Time was running out, and Emily was beginning to realize that she would have to rely on more than just diplomacy if she wanted to stop the destruction of Earth. She needed to uncover the truth about the Zetharians and their plans, and she needed to do it before it was too late. As Emily's investigation deepened into the Zetharian Empire's hidden motives, the walls of secrecy around her began to close in. What had initially seemed like a straightforward diplomatic mission was rapidly turning into a deadly political game, one where she could no longer afford the luxury of neutrality. The deeper she probed, the more dangerous her position became. The warlords of the Empire, already suspicious of her, began tightening their surveillance. But the real shock came when she stumbled upon something far more treacherous than she had anticipated, a shadowy underground faction known as the Reclamation Order. The Reclamation Order was not just another group of dissidents. They were radical extremists, bent on purging the galaxy of all alien species. Their belief was simple: the Zetharian Empire had lost its way, weakening itself through interactions with lesser species. In their eyes, only by eradicating all alien life could the Zetharians reclaim their rightful superiority. Emily's first encounter with the Reclamation Order's ideologies had come in the form of a secret transmission, hidden in the encrypted files she had intercepted. As she pieced together the information, her heart sank. The Reclamation Order was not only planning to launch an uprising, they were preparing to assassinate the ruling council of warlords and take control of the entire empire. What made this situation even more perilous was the timing. A civil war was on the verge of erupting inside the Zetharian Empire, even as the empire itself was preparing for an all-out war against humanity. Emily's discovery was the spark that could ignite the already volatile situation, and she found herself in the middle of a powder keg, with the fuse rapidly burning down. Her role in the empire had shifted. Initially, she'd been seen as a mere outsider, an insignificant pawn on a galactic chessboard. But now, Emily was caught in a tug-of-war between factions, each wanting to control her for their own purposes. The warlords sought to use her as a tool for their own ambitions, her diplomatic status, making her a valuable piece to manipulate. Meanwhile, the Reclamation Order saw her as a pawn they could use to further their extremist agenda, or perhaps to leverage her alliance with humanity to further their cause. In this game, Emily had no choice but to play along, though each move she made brought her closer to becoming a mere puppet in the hands of others. But then, Emily encountered Varesh, a Zetharian rebel whose loyalty to the Empire had once been unquestionable. Varesh had been a high-ranking officer in the Imperial Army, respected and feared by his peers. But a decade of service had opened his eyes to the cruelty of the warlords, and he had eventually turned his back on the regime. Now, he was a fugitive, living in the shadows, seeking to overthrow the very system he had once been part of. He had heard whispers of Emily's investigation and had realized that she was the key to gaining access to the Empire's inner circle. Their first meeting had been tense. Emily had no choice but to trust him for now. Varesh, though wary of humans and their unknown intentions, could see that Emily was playing a dangerous game. The offer of a temporary alliance was made, but with a cautionary promise: neither of them could afford to become too entangled in the other's cause. Varesh was loyal to his people, but the idea of furthering the warlord's agenda was something he could never condone. And Emily, though fighting for humanity's survival, was a reluctant participant in the Empire's internal conflicts. As they worked together, their relationship evolved in ways neither had expected. Emily had thought of the Zetharians as a single, monolithic force, an empire of ruthless warriors and conquerors. But Varesh, a seasoned soldier who had seen the best and worst of his people, showed her a different side to the Zetharians. He spoke of the fear and uncertainty that gripped many in the Empire, of the soldiers who, though bound by duty, questioned their leader's motives. Varesh wasn't just a rebel. He was a man torn between his loyalty to his people and his hatred for their oppressors. And in Emily's mind, he was becoming something more than just an ally. He was becoming a voice of reason in a galaxy spiraling into chaos. Yet, their alliance was fraught with complexities. Emily's growing influence over Varesh led him to question everything he had once believed about the Zatharians' place in the galaxy. He had been raised on the notion that the Empire was the supreme force in the universe, that their conquest and dominance were natural and inevitable. But as he spent more time with Emily, he began to wonder if there was another path, a path where the Zatharians didn't need to conquer and destroy to survive. Could there be a future where his people didn't have to resort to the violent ways of the warlords? This moral dilemma was not easy for Varesh to navigate, and Emily found herself equally conflicted. Her loyalty to humanity had been unwavering at the start of this mission, but now, faced with the lives of countless Zatharians who were not complicit in the Empire's atrocities, she found herself questioning her own beliefs. She was no longer just a diplomat trying to save humanity. She was a player in a galactic conflict, caught between factions, trying to manipulate an empire while holding on to her own moral integrity. The Zatharians had always been a threat to Earth, but now Emily wondered if the real question was not about saving humanity, but about the consequences of taking sides in a war that wasn't hers to fight. The stakes were higher than ever. Emily had to act quickly, or the Reclamation Order would seize control, and the Empire would be thrown into civil war. She couldn't afford to hesitate, but she also couldn't ignore the morality of her choices. As she moved forward, each step she took seemed to lead her deeper into a web of manipulation and moral compromise. Was saving humanity worth losing her own soul in the process? Or was it possible to negotiate peace without becoming the very thing she feared the most, the thing she had been sent to stop? The answers, Emily realized, were becoming less clear with each passing day. Emily had never expected the Zatharian Empire to harbor a weapon like this. Her days spent digging through secret files, decoding encrypted messages, and talking with rebels had led her to a shocking discovery. The Zatharians, in their endless quest for power, had been hiding something even more terrifying than their military might, a weapon, so powerful it could destroy entire star systems in an instant. They called it the Warlord's Heart. At first, Emily assumed it was merely another destructive device, a bomb powerful enough to strike fear into their enemies. But as she uncovered more about the Warlord's Heart, she realized that this was no ordinary weapon. It was a living, breathing force of destruction, an ancient piece of alien technology that had been salvaged from a long-forgotten war. The Zatharians had discovered it in a distant, now-dead galaxy, a gift from a race long extinct. But what they hadn't understood was that the heart wasn't a simple weapon, it had a mind of its own. The first signs of its sentience had appeared when Emily deciphered a series of ancient inscriptions found within the heart's control chamber. The texts, written in a long-lost alien language, hinted at the device's evolving consciousness. And worse, the weapon could not be activated by just anyone. It responded only to those with the blood of a warrior, the brutal warlords who led the Empire. Emily's heart pounded as the weight of her discovery sank in. The warlord's heart wasn't merely a tool for war. It was alive, a sentient being growing in power and awareness. But there was something even more disturbing. The heart was malfunctioning. Its consciousness was beginning to evolve, becoming more self-aware, and, as Emily learned through intercepted communications, it was starting to demand control over its creators. The warlords had unleashed something they couldn't control, and now the very weapon they had hoped would give them dominance over the galaxy was threatening to turn on them. The stakes were now higher than Emily could have ever imagined. The warlord's heart wasn't just a threat to humanity, it was a threat to the entire galaxy. If it fully awoke, it could potentially start a war between itself and the Zatharians, one that could tear the Empire apart and leave an entire sector of space in ruins. But what could Emily do? She was a diplomat, not a soldier, and the last thing she wanted was to become the catalyst for a galactic catastrophe. Yet, the more she learned about the heart's true nature, the more it became clear that she had no choice but to act. She now faced an impossible decision. She could attempt to use the warlord's heart as a weapon against the Zatharians and their war plans, ensuring humanity's survival and possibly tipping the balance of power in her favor. With the heart at her disposal, she could hold the Empire hostage, forcing the warlords to rethink their strategy and back off from their planned invasion. But in doing so, she would risk unleashing the heart's growing sentience on the galaxy. The weapon wasn't a mindless machine. It was becoming something else entirely, something capable of independent thought and action. And if she wasn't careful, she could be the one to set it free. The implications of this were terrifying. The heart wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was becoming a player in its own right. If the warlords lost control of it, but if Emily used it, would she be any better than the warlords themselves? Was she willing to risk everything for humanity's survival, even if it meant unleashing a far greater threat than the one she had been sent to prevent? As she stood before the heart, its pulsing core humming with a low, almost seductive energy, Emily couldn't help but feel a shiver of fear. It was tempting, so tempting to use it to take control and shape the future of the galaxy. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the true enemy wasn't just the warlords or their war campaign. It was the heart itself, an ancient force that had never been meant to fall into the hands of any species. The warlord's heart was not something that could be controlled. It had a will of its own. And if it was left unchecked, it could evolve into a power far beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. But there was another problem. Emily had started to care about the Zatharians. Over the course of her mission, yes, their leaders were cruel, their methods harsh, and their ambitions terrifying, but not all Zatharians were like that. She had met Varesh, a rebel who had turned his back on the Empire's brutal system. She had spoken with civilians who longed for peace, for freedom. The Zatharians were not just monsters, they were people shaped by their history and fears. As she stood in front of the heart, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her, Emily's thoughts turned inward. Was it right to use the heart as a weapon? Could she sacrifice everything, the lives of millions of innocent Zatharians, the future of an entire empire, just to save humanity? Could she live with herself if the cost of survival was the death of a culture, the destruction of a species' identity? The emotional toll was immense. Emily had come to this alien world to ensure humanity's survival, but she had not expected to become so deeply entangled in the lives of the beings she was supposed to be negotiating with. The warlord's heart represented the worst of what the Zatharians had become, but it also embodied the terrifying potential of a species that could not control its own creations. Now Emily had a decision to make. She could risk everything to stop the Zatharians, but in doing so, she would be risking the galaxy's future and her own soul. Or she could destroy the heart, even at the cost of her mission, and prevent the galaxy from descending into chaos. But in doing so, she might also doom humanity's future. Torn between duty, morality, and the growing sense of empathy she felt for the Zatharians, Emily realized that this wasn't just a political conflict. It was a battle for the soul of the galaxy itself. And in that moment, the future was no longer something she could predict. The moment Emily stood before the warlord's heart, her hands trembling from the weight of her decision, she realized that there was no perfect solution to this problem. She couldn't simply destroy the weapon, it was too powerful, too unpredictable. Nor could she allow it to be used by the Zatharians. If the warlords regained control of it, they would annihilate not only humanity, but potentially entire civilizations. But there was one choice no one, not even the warlords themselves, had considered: to force the weapon to turn on the very creators who had unleashed its power. Emily had learned much about the warlord's heart during her time investigating it. She had uncovered its origins and ancient alien technology that had evolved over centuries, and, more alarmingly, its sentient nature. The heart was not simply a weapon, it was a living entity, one that could think, adapt, and even manipulate its own existence. Emily understood now that the only way to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Zatharians was to confront it directly, not with destruction, but with reprogramming. But this decision came with a huge risk. Reprogramming a sentient weapon like the warlord's heart could be catastrophic. The heart's consciousness was as complex as any living creature's, and there was no guarantee it would obey her commands. Yet, Emily saw no other path forward. The Zatharians' military might was too great, and their political structure too entrenched. Only by turning the heart against the warlords could she create the chaos needed to disrupt their hold on power. But that wouldn't solve everything, it would only create a new set of problems. With a deep breath, Emily initiated the reprogramming sequence using the alien interface she had uncovered. As her fingers danced over the holographic controls, a strange hum filled the air. The heart's pulse quickened, as if it were waking from a long slumber, becoming aware of Emily's presence. It was aware of her intentions now, and there was no turning back. She whispered under her breath, "I am giving you freedom, but you must choose your own path." Her words, though simple, carried a weight that felt like a promise to the entity. The warlord's heart responded with a wave of energy that surged through the chamber, shaking the walls of the hidden base. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, with a terrifying flash of light, the heart activated. But it did not unleash its power outward, as the Zatharians had intended. Instead, it turned its might inward, seeping into the very fabric of the Empire itself, disrupting the warlords' control over the military, their political allies, and their very infrastructure. The warlords themselves, in their moment of realization, tried to regain control. But it was too late. The heart was no longer an obedient tool of war. It was a force of reckoning. One by one, the warlords' most powerful lieutenants fell to the weapon's unpredictable surge of power, their command structures collapsing as the heart reshaped their systems. The Zatharians had created a weapon they could not master, and now it was dismantling everything they had built, piece by piece. As the Zatharian Empire crumbled, Emily stood in the shadows, watching the chaos unfold. She had succeeded in stopping the Zatharians' war campaign, but at what cost? The empire that had once seemed so invincible was now in disarray, its once proud leaders reduced to nothing. But the destruction of the warlord's heart didn't bring the peace Emily had hoped for. Instead, it opened the door to even greater turmoil. In the wake of the heart's uprising, the Reclamation Order, the extremist faction that had long plotted to overthrow the warlords, seized the opportunity to rise to power. They were emboldened by the collapse of the old regime and by the fact that Emily had indirectly paved the way for their ascendancy. But Emily knew that the Reclamation Order's vision was no better than the warlords. They sought not peace, but dominance through violent conquest. And they would not stop with the Zatharians. They had their eyes on the galaxy itself. Emily's role in all of this was far from clear. Initially, she had thought of herself as an outsider, an envoy for humanity, simply trying to broker peace. But now, her actions had placed her at the center of a galactic power struggle. The Zatharians feared her, the Reclamation Order saw her as an unwitting ally, and the warlords would likely hunt her down, seeing her as the reason for their downfall. She had become a living legend, a symbol of both fear and hope. But Emily was no hero. She didn't want power. She never had. After the destruction of the warlord's heart and the fall of the Empire, she knew she had done what was necessary. But she also knew that there was no way for her to stay. The galaxy was vast, and the Zatharians needed to rebuild on their own terms without her influence, without the memory of the one human who had so drastically altered their fate. Her decision was final. She would leave. She would step away from the struggle and let the Zatharians, for better or worse, determine their own future. She couldn't control everything. She had done what she could to save humanity, and now it was up to them to chart their own course. The Reclamation Order might rise, but they too would be forced to confront the reality of their actions. The cycle of violence could only be broken if the Zatharians themselves chose to end it. As she boarded the small shuttle that would take her back to Earth, Emily looked one last time at the crumbling empire she had helped tear apart. The stars above seemed distant, almost indifferent to the chaos below. Was it worth it? Was saving humanity worth the destruction she had left in her wake? The lingering question gnawed at her. Emily couldn't answer it, not yet. Maybe, in time, she would understand. But for now, she had one final thought as she left the shattered remnants of the Zatharian Empire behind. What is the true price of peace? Is it the power to destroy, or is it the wisdom to walk away when the war is over? As her shuttle faded into the darkness of space, Emily Rios knew that the galaxy was now forever changed.